During the late 90s and early 2000s, I was the sports expert at Sotheby's Auction House, which means I was in charge of like old collectibles, mostly baseball. You're walking the halls or riding the elevators with some of the greatest experts in the world in you know, Fabergé eggs or arms and armor. It's just this great kind of mix of people, and I was living down on St. Mark's Place at the time between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, which is probably one of the noisiest blocks in the world, and every kid who decides to run away from home ends up on that block. It was a very kind of tale of two cities, going and dressing up in a suit and heading off to fancy Sotheby's every morning and then coming back and changing as quickly as possible into some dirty t-shirt and heading out to Coney Island High or something to see a band play. But you know, that's kind of why we all live in New York. My first book was a memoir called Seemed Like a Good Idea at the Time. I had a series of very strange jobs. As a baseball player first, I was a private investigator. I went off and worked at Sotheby's, and then I kind of rode the dot-com boom up and down, mostly down. And I ended up with this episodic but very like true story, and it allowed me then, I think, to realize that you can do this as a career. And for some reason, I'm a very impatient person in the rest of my life, but I don't mind sitting in a room for 3 years and trying to tell a good story. My books are not organized at all, which is kind of the way I like it. Classics mixed in with pop culture, mixed in with nonfiction, and it just is a big mess. I have this one shelf here of first editions, which are all pretty much my favorite books. Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which I've probably read 4 or 5 times now. You could read the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test and think it's a novel. Like, it's a really, it's a real page turner. But of course, there's a broader cultural story there. As a journalist, you kind of wonder how he did it all, and you end up reading it again and again, like carefully, trying to pick up clues as to how he reported those stories. You can also just, as a reader, really get lost in it, and it's just this beautiful literature as well, so it works on any number of levels. Now here's a very cool book about New York. It's called Report from Engine Company 82, the busiest engine company, fire engine company in New York City, and it's written by Dennis Smith. It's just one of these great bigger tales about a city that is told from a really myopic, I guess, viewpoint at first, and then it just expands into this wonderful story of a specific era in New York City, in this case the 70s, when the city was obviously going through an immense amount of turmoil, especially the South Bronx, which was you know, almost like Beirut. All the buildings were burning down because the owners were setting fire to it because they could make more money off the insurance than they could off of having it standing as a building, and the firefighters were paying a heavy price for that. I get a lot of galleys, and they just kind of show up in the mail. Here's one by Melissa Phoebos, which I did write about for the Rumpus, called Whip Smart. She was a dominatrix for several years, and but she's also a wonderful writer, and so she kind of goes into that world and takes the reader along, and it ended up being a wonderful, wonderful book about a very interesting subculture of New York City. American Subversive tells the story of a young woman who falls into radicalism. The groundswell of just political aggression is out there right now. My book is about 2 people, this woman, Paige, and this guy, Aiden, who is a New York City blogger and is the opposite of Paige in every way. And I want to bring these 2 characters, the girl who cares too much about the world and the boy who doesn't care at all, together. And it'd be nice, I guess, if the larger country kind of did the same thing in terms of political parties. Here's an interesting book which brings together 2 of my favorite subjects, radicals in New York City. One of my favorite stories involves the Weather Underground. They had a bomb factory in the basement of a townhouse on 11th Street. They crossed wires and the building exploded, and 3 of them died. Dustin Hoffman was living right next door. And so there is this famous picture of him just out on 11th Street staring up at this smoldering gap in the buildings that had 10 minutes before been a nice quiet row house on one of the nicest blocks in Greenwich Village. It's just this American moment that's captured perfectly, but it's also a major moment in the history of American radicalism too. It kind of ruined their movement because they were, you know, they blew themselves up. I've had that above my desk now the whole time I was writing the book. Agitate, sabotage the parliament, don't vote. A neat thing to kind of look up at and realize that in the real world, the stuff that you were writing about actually really did happen. Okay, that's all you're gonna get.